Hello. Today we're going to look at the second part of chapter 6 and really focus in on kind of the motivation environment, how to create an environment that is motivating. So in the last lecture, we talked about kind of this idea of diagnosing performance problems as being either an ability issue or a motivation issue. And we looked at those different equations, which kind of help us break down what really makes up motivation, what really makes up ability, and we strictly focused on the ability piece of it. So we looked at kind of tools that we could use to help increase performance if ability was the problem. So today we're going to focus on the third learning objective, which is fostering a motivating work environment. So the idea here is to create an environment where people are motivated through these different kind of pieces that we can put into place as the managers. All right, so those are the equations just as a review. Again, we're really, in this particular lecture, going to look at how to increase performance through motivation, right? And so we're going to see what can we do, what things can we put in place to increase someone's desire and commitment, which then hopefully would impact their performance in a positive way. All right, so again, we've identified a motivation problem, and so kind of here's the model that we want to use. So the idea with this model, there's 3 phases, right? So as we go through the lecture, I'll highlight what phase we're in. We're going to start with the first phase of motivation to performance, and then we'll move into performance to outcomes phase, and the last phase is outcomes to satisfaction. Our goal after we implement, there's a couple different steps within each phase. And the idea is that if we implement these different things successfully, then our employee is going to end satisfied, which is going to kind of rejuvenate the process, right? So they'll end very satisfied, which will increase their motivation and impact their performance, and this kind of should cycle, continuously, ideally. But if we don't do it very effectively, then and we end with a dissatisfied employee, then it makes it more challenging to motivate them in the future. So we really want to think, what can we do? What's our part as managers, as an organization, to kind of set this particular tone? All right, so we're going to look here. If you think about what would be the first step, if we're trying to motivate employees to reach a certain performance, there are some things that we can do to help them reach that performance level that we're expecting. And the first thing is to set those goals. Let them know what those expectations are, right? So the first step within this phase is goal setting. So we want to make sure that when we set goals, that we're setting good goals in terms of making sure that they're specific, that they're measurable, so we know if they've actually accomplished this goal or not, that they're aligned with the overall goals of the organization, that they're realistic, right? Challenging, but not too challenging. And then also that we do put that time frame on there, so we know there is an end date for this particular goal. There's 3 things to think about with goal setting, is that it is a continuous process. This isn't something that I should set goals at the beginning of the semester or the beginning of the year and not look at those goals again until the end. As a good manager is going to, have kind of check-ins with their employees to make sure that they're on track, to make sure to provide them feedback throughout the process so they know how they're doing. If they, as a manager, I'll know what kind of resources or what kind of support I can provide to them, right? Just in this first step, that's motivating. If I have a manager who is willing, who's checking in, not micromanaging, but kind of just checking in, and these are 5-minute, 10-minute meetings. They don't have to be kind of these in-depth meetings that I'm having with every employee, but it brings those goals to the top of the stack of papers in my office, and it helps me get refocused on them again because my manager just asked about them. Now I'm thinking about them again. My manager's aware of where I'm standing. I know exactly where I'm standing. So at the end of the year, there's no surprises, right? If I've had these conversations throughout. So it should be a continuous process. We might need to alter the goals. Things change in our environment. And so, making adjustments is also something that would be part of that continuous process. We also want to make sure that when we set the goals, it is a two-way conversation. The manager should be involved, and so should the employee. Both parties should be part of the process, not just the manager telling the employee what their goals are for the year, but the employee having a say in that as well. It increases commitment and ownership to those goals, right? So both parties really ideally should be involved in the overall process. All right, so those are some things that we want to think about when we are goal setting, making sure that they're SMART goals, it's a two-way conversation, and that it's a continuous process. The other thing that happens in this phase is this idea that managers should remove those obstacles, right? So a theory that supports this is called the path goal theory. And the path goal theory is actually a leadership theory, but as a manager as we establish these goals with our employees, we also want to make sure that our employees feel like they can actually accomplish the goals. And what path goal theory kind of suggests is that as a manager, I want to make sure that I'm removing all these different obstacles so that they can perform and accomplish these goals. And so some of the things that the path goal theory looks at is, as a leader, how much should I be involved, right? So and I can assess that because I don't want to be a micromanager. I don't want to be nowhere to be found when they need me, right? So how much should I be involved? And so some things that the path goal theory says you should consider is I need to understand the tasks that my employees are performing. So, how much help is really needed? Are these pretty routine, pretty structured tasks? Then probably not a lot of help is necessary. But if they're pretty ambiguous type of tasks, then maybe they need some guidance, or at least me to be available if they need me. The other thing to think about is, what are the expectations of my subordinates, of my employees? How much do they want me to help them? All right, so if I have employees that have been around for a long time, they probably don't want that help. They want more autonomy. They want to have more responsibility, and that's motivating to them. But if I have a newer employee or someone who's kind of struggling a little bit, then they might need more assistance and expect that I'm around more. The last area that I would want to consider when I'm trying to kind of figure out how much involvement is necessary is the organizational structure and systems that are in place. What does the organization already offer? So I'm not being redundant and reinventing the wheel in any sense, but I can guide my employees to these resources that are already available. Again, that is comforting. That's motivating to employees when the manager is willing to kind of guide them in these different directions. All right. And ideally, if I really think about this, I set these goals, I kind of clear this path appropriately for my employees. Hopefully they're going to reach those performance expectations that have been set. All right, so you can see kind of that's the first phase, to get them to set those performance expectations. I have to communicate what those expectations are, and that's through kind of this goal setting process. And I need to encourage them to feel like they can complete those goals and meet those performance expectations. And that's really kind of the path goal theory concept. Once they meet those performance expectations, we want to start thinking about the outcomes of their performance. And so when the main step in this phase is kind of the reward and discipline step, right? And so when we think about rewards and discipline, we want to make sure that we're using them to encourage exceptional behaviors and we're using discipline to extinguish unacceptable behavior. So depending, if they don't meet performance expectations, then we might need to take more of a disciplinary approach to try to encourage better behavior in the future. But if they do meet expectations, then we would want to use obviously some type of reward to encourage that behavior in the future. Just some things when you think about the best award programs that are out there. Giving awards publicly is a good way to recognize that performance for that individual and to kind of show others what it takes to get that type of recognition so they can kind of see that. Use awards infrequently. If you're always rewarding people, then they kind of lose, if everyone's getting an award, then sometimes they don't mean as much. So we want to use them maybe a little more infrequently. Make sure you have a credible process that you use so it's fair and people feel that it is a valuable process. And think about the culture that you're in. What makes sense for that particular work culture, and align your award program appropriately with that. When we think about rewards and discipline, we want to think about managers get what they reinforce, not what they want. So if I am reinforcing things that maybe I don't even realize, maybe I see there's some poor behavior from my employees and I don't do anything about it, in a sense, I'm saying it's okay, right? And so again, I'm going to get that behavior in the future, even though that's not what I want, but either because I'm reinforcing it in some way. And in this case, I'm reinforcing it by ignoring it. All right. And so because I don't do anything about it, then it gets, maybe interpreted that it's okay to act like this. So we really want to think about making sure that we're reinforcing the behaviors that we truly want to continue. So there's two kind of strategies here, the disciplining, obviously, and rewarding. We're going to spend more time on rewarding, but I do want to kind of just touch on kind of the disciplining strategy. And so you can see that on the screen now, there's kind of this process. And I'm just going to highlight some of the things from it. So in the actual disciplining phase that you see, it's this idea of reprimanding and then leading to redirect. So when you're disciplining an employee, you want to make sure that you're identifying the unacceptable behavior, making sure that they recognize the unacceptable behavior, recognizing why it's unacceptable, right? So you might want to connect that behavior with how it's impacting other groups or other individuals. And then now we start to redirect. Once we know that they understand this behavior and that this behavior is unacceptable, now we start redirecting that behavior. And that the idea here is making sure that they know what the correct behavior is. Don't just assume, now that they know that this certain behavior is unacceptable, that they know what the right behavior is. They might assume one thing and I'm thinking another thing. So we want to be very clear on what behavior are you expecting from this employee, all right, and have that conversation, and that's going to help redirect that behavior. And then over time, we start reinforcing that behavior with rewards. If they show that new behavior consistently, then we reward it. And it's not rewards with a pay raise and, these crazy big incentives. It's maybe just some verbal feedback, some verbal praise, some recognition to show that employee that not only do I recognize that this change, but also connecting how that's impacting others, right? So they can see the positive impact as well, right? So it's maybe reinforcing with just some conversations, if nothing else, right? So that's something that we really want to think about. The reprimanding and the disciplining is really important, but if I want that change to happen, if I want to shape their behavior in a better way, then there is kind of that reinforcement that I need to be aware of. When we think of the reward process, though, whether it's rewarding during the discipline process, right, after we discipline and we start rewarding based on that behavior, or if it's rewarding because they have met performance expectations, there's different types of rewards that we can provide. We can provide extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. So extrinsic are more of those rewards that are outside the control of the individual. So it might be a pay raise, a promotion, even praise really is extrinsic because it's coming from someone else. Intrinsic outcomes or intrinsic rewards are really kind of these internal needs that we have a need to fulfill. And everyone has different levels of these needs. And so, these are things that a pay raise, a promotion's not going to fill. All right. And so we'll look at some examples of these intrinsic needs here in the next couple slides. So when we look at, and so let me back up for just a second. When we look at extrinsic rewards, sometimes I don't have enough in my budget to give you a raise, or there's no position available for me to give you a promotion to. And so, I want to think about what are some of these intrinsic options that I might have. All right. And so if we think about this idea of work design, and this idea of work design gets into this model, the job characteristics model. And the idea behind this model is saying, if I can change the core job dimensions, which is that first column on the left, if I can have an impact there, right, this is going to feed some of these intrinsic needs that we have. All right, and that's motivating. People feel rewarded when these needs are met. Okay, so for example, the core job dimensions on the left, skill variety, task identity, and task significance. If I can do something to increase the skill variety, which is meaning give them a variety of things to do that they have to use different skill sets to accomplish these different tasks. Task identity is being able to see a project from start to finish, right? So they can really identify with what they're doing, right? I have a small piece, but I can see what that big picture looks like. And task significance is seeing the impact, right? So how do I impact the consumer, the end user, the goal, whatever it might be, to increase that significance? If I can do something in those areas, then the idea is that as an employee, I feel like my work is more meaningful. And I think we can all agree that we want to do something that's meaningful. And so if I feel rewarded by that, I feel motivated by doing work that has meaning behind it. And so you can see kind of what those outcomes look like. If I experience more meaningfulness in my work, then I'm more motivated. My quality of my work is better. I'm more satisfied with my job, right? And ultimately lower absenteeism and turnover, right? And so these are all intrinsic rewards, right? I'm not getting a pay raise. I'm not getting a promotion, right? But I'm doing something that's having an impact. I'm doing something that's using a lot of my different skills, and that feels good, and that's rewarding. If I can increase the autonomy in someone's role, it helps them feel that they're experiencing more responsibility, they have more say over the outcomes of their work, all right, and that leads to the same type of personal and work outcomes that I mentioned before. The last one is increasing the feedback someone receives in their job, right? So acknowledging the results of their work activities, letting them know how they're doing, letting them know how the customers feel they're doing, right? And so they can experience that feedback from maybe multiple viewpoints, right? And hopefully that's positive feedback, but even negative feedback, even criticism can help obviously improve performance and ultimately down the road increase their quality and their motivation, especially when they see that they've improved in those different areas. So an example that I use a lot of times in our face-to-face class lectures is the assembly line. So if you think about the assembly line, it's a very monotonous type of job. I'm doing the same thing over and over every day, right? So how do I get my employees to stay motivated, to stay focused, and making sure that they're not making silly errors, that they're not getting lazy, right? But they're really concerned and committed to their quality of their work. Right? Maybe I can't give them a pay raise to keep them motivated, and really that pay raise probably only motivates them for a very short period of time, and then they kind of forget about it. All right, so what can I do intrinsically if I think back to these job characteristics? What could I increase in the assembly line that would help increase that motivation and make them feel rewarded, to make them feel like they're adding value to their job, right? So there's lots of things that students typically come up with in this kind of example, but maybe, if I'm thinking about skill variety, maybe as an assembly line worker, I cross-train my employees so they can, do multiple jobs along the assembly line, and we have maybe a little bit of a rotation. And if I do rotate my employees throughout the assembly line, that also helps with task identity, because now they kind of see multiple steps of the process, not just their one step, but now they get a better sense of what the entire process looks like and what that end product actually looks like. Right? So that could increase some of their task identity as well. If I can make a connection between what that employee is doing and how important that is in order to make sure that this product is safe for our end user, and I can make that connection, or if I get some customer feedback, that can add to the significance of their job and what they do. Right, so that maybe providing some of that, giving them more responsibility on the line, maybe giving them the ability to stop the line if they see that something's not right, that the products are coming by with missing parts or, whatever, giving them the capability to stop the line and not having to go get someone to come back, review before they can stop it. Right? So increasing their autonomy in some way. Those are all little things that I could do, and that increases their commitment, their ownership of their job, and that's rewarding to employees. All right. Some other work design strategies that come from those core job characteristics: combining tasks. Again, that's kind of that increase of skill variety. Putting employees in groups, again, to work on something that helps us understand and see the project from start to finish, and not just my little piece and then passing it on. Helping them letting employees establish client relationships, having that direct relationship with the client and kind of taking the middleman out of that. And so they can, increases their autonomy a little bit that way, provides them that feedback that they kind of thrive on, increase their authority, and improving or creating open feedback channels, right, are all simple things that I can do that really creates a more motivating, rewarding type of environment. Some of the needs that these intrinsic rewards fill, right? We all have these needs. Some, the level or the intensity of the needs change depending on the person, and it depends on maybe where you're at in your life and your work life, all that good stuff. A lot of components go into this, but we all have kind of some sort of need for achievement. Right, so this behavior towards competition with a standard of excellence, so what can I do to, feed that need, right? A pay raise isn't going to do it, right? So, giving them something that they can excel at, that they can achieve, so giving them more responsibility could potentially feed this need for achievement, need for affiliation, to be with others, to work with others. So, creating an environment where people enjoy one another, whether it's a work group or just a department, so I might have different gatherings, different committees that people are working together on, and it kind of fills that need. And so it's harder to leave an organization when I've made these connections. And then there's a need for power, so the desire to influence others and to control one's environment, right? So again, maybe increasing someone's autonomy, their ability to be in charge of a program or a committee, right? Or all these needs that, if given to the right people, can really be motivating and really be rewarding to those employees. And I don't have to give a pay raise to keep them motivated. People are motivated by a lot more than just those extrinsic rewards. All right, so we want to think about that. The last phase is looking at, once we've given these outcomes, how do we ensure that these outcomes, whether intrinsic or extrinsic, lead to a satisfied employee? So there's kind of three things that we want to think about when in this particular phase. First, we want to recognize that the common mistake is that that all employees value the same reward, and that is a mistake. What I value as reward is most likely going to be different than what you value as a reward. What I valued as a reward when I first started working is a lot different than what I value now. So what we value is going to be dependent on a lot of things, and it's going to change, which makes it very tricky for a manager to know what rewards they should give their employees. The other common mistake is assuming that the manager's preference is the same as the employees. So if I'm the manager and I say, well, I would love this as a reward, right, and assuming that my employees would love it too. All right, those are common mistakes when we think about those outcomes, those rewards. And if I fall into these things, most likely I'm going to end with a dissatisfied employee. So one way to kind of manage this is to look at having some type of cafeteria style system. And you'll see organizations with this. And the idea behind the cafeteria style program is that I get to pick and choose. So I have options. So it's not kind of this one size fits all approach, but I get to select kind of from a menu, from a list of what I want, depending on my needs and my situation. So it's a nice flexible approach, especially because as we become more diverse as organizations, we need to have this particular flexibility. And so if I go back to that cafeteria style program, employees are going to pick rewards that they want, that they feel is worth it, right? And so one of the things that we want to consider at this stage in order to end with a satisfied employee is this idea of salience, making sure employees feel that all this effort, I put forth a lot of effort to meet these goals. Was the reward worth it? And so that salience, was the effort that I put in worth the reward that I got, right? And so with a cafeteria style program, if they're picking those things, then we can maybe make the assumption that it's going to be worth it, or else they wouldn't have picked that particular reward. The other area that we want to think about is the fairness and the equity of the rewards themselves and the process. So if you look here, when we think about fairness and equity, workers evaluate what they get from the relationship to what they put in, and compare this ratio to others in a comparison group. All right, so again, is this fair? I worked a ton of hours to accomplish these goals. I got whatever out of it. Right? Not only am I assessing that, is that fair? Was it worth it? But I'm also assessing, my coworker over here got the same reward as I did, and I don't feel like they put forth the amount of effort. I didn't see them in the office early or late or on the weekends, right? And so I start making that comparison as well. It's a very tricky process because I'm basing it off of what I see. Maybe this person, my coworker, who I never see in early or late or on the weekends, is on her computer at home working online early and late and on the weekends, but I don't see that. So I assume that they're not working as hard as I am. And so now I think that this isn't fair. And so it's my perception. It's not reality, but I'm basing that off my perception. And most likely I'm going to be kind of frustrated. So it's really tricky because there's no way a manager is able to make sure everyone knows what everyone's doing. And that's really not a way to manage your time as a manager. But recognizing that that is something employees are doing. So we want to make sure that we are at least presenting a fair process and making sure that they know that we're basing our rewards and our outcomes on a fair method. And then the last thing that happens at this phase is feedback. I want to make sure that I'm providing feedback to my employees and connecting their behavior to the outcome. So why did they get this reward, right? And so I want to make sure that I'm making that connection in order for them to truly understand and hopefully be satisfied with why they got the reward in the first place. So things to consider to help make that connection stronger is the length of time between the behavior and the rewards, making sure that that is the amount of time is very short between those two things. Right, so if they have the expected behavior, they meet a goal, they do something, I want to make sure that reward is kind of right behind that. So they know that they're getting rewarded for that behavior, right? Because that behavior is what we want to reinforce. If there's some time lag between those two and something happens in between the time that I met that goal and I got that reward, like maybe I went into my boss's office and said, "What's up? I worked really hard to meet that goal and I got nothing." And then comes the reward. Why did I get the reward? In my mind, I got the reward because I went and complained about it, not because I met the goal. All right. And so now the behavior that's being reinforced is that part where I complained. Right, and obviously that's not probably what you're wanting to reinforce. So making sure that connection is there, and so the shorter the amount of time is between the behavior and the outcome, the better. And then also making sure that you're pairing that with actual feedback, that you're getting the explanation with the reward, right? So you're getting this reward because of why, right? To make that connection stronger, again, so they know what to continue doing. And if I do those things, right, this helps start to create this motivating environment, right? I set these goals, get them to meet these performance expectations. I reward them with either an extrinsic or intrinsic reward. And ideally, they end very satisfied. They're happy with the amount of effort that they put in comparison with the output that they received. Right, and the cycle continues. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. You understand the different phases of the model. If not, let me know and I can answer any questions for you. But until then, I will talk to you later.